They laughed when the veteran inherited a cursed mountain ranch until his dog uncovered the secret buried beneath it. When Caleb Mercer sat through the will reading, he expected nothing. Maybe a forgotten item, a name mentioned out of obligation. Instead, he was handed a place no one wanted, a ranch people whispered about, a land tied to fear and silence. But what everyone dismissed as a curse wasn't what it seemed, because the moment his loyal dog began digging, everything changed. What they found beneath that land would force Caleb to face a truth far deeper than the past he tried to forget. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where decisions were made long before anyone walked in. While Caleb Mercer sat near the far end of the long table, his back straight, his hands resting quietly on his knees. He didn't shift, didn't fidget. Years of discipline had taught him how to stay still, even when everything inside him refused to settle. Beside him, Bruno sat with quiet alertness, his large frame pressed close to Caleb's leg. The German shepherd's ears were upright, his dark eyes moving from person to person, reading the room in a way that felt almost human. Unlike the others, Bruno wasn't distracted. He wasn't impatient. He was watching. Across the table, relatives whispered to each other in low voices, their words wrapped in politeness but edged with expectation. A few glanced at Caleb, then quickly looked away. Others didn't bother hiding their judgment. He had been gone too long. Or maybe in their minds, he had never truly belonged here at all. Caleb kept his eyes forward. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Mr. Whitaker, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His voice carried the slow weight of routine, steady and practiced. As outlined in the will, he began, flipping a page, the estate will be distributed among the surviving family members as follows. Names were called, properties were listed, accounts, jewelry, parcels of land. With each inheritance, subtle reactions rippled through the room. A tight smile, a relieved sigh, a quiet nod. People leaned forward just a little more each time, as though the next name might carry something better, something heavier, something worth more. Caleb didn't lean forward. He didn't expect anything. He had learned a long time ago that expectation only made disappointment sharper. Bruno shifted slightly, pressing closer. The lawyer paused for a moment longer than necessary before continuing. And to Mr. Caleb Mercer. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. Caleb lifted his eyes, calm on the surface, though something faint stirred beneath it. Not hope, not quite, just awareness. Mr. Whitaker glanced up briefly, then back down at the document. I leave full ownership of the Mercer Ridge property, including all structures, land, and contents therein. There was a beat of silence. Then, a soft scoff from somewhere across the table. Another voice, barely lowered, muttered, "You've got to be kidding." Someone let out a short, dry laugh. Caleb didn't react right away. The words hung in the air, settling slowly, like dust. Mercer Ridge. He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years. Bruno's ears twitched. What is that exactly? A woman asked, her tone thin with disbelief. You don't know? Another replied quietly. That's the old place up in the mountains. The one nobody goes near. The cursed one, someone added. More murmurs followed. Not curious, not impressed, uneasy. Caleb felt the weight of their attention shift, not toward admiration, but something else entirely. Pity, relief, distance. He turned his head slightly, his gaze steady. The old ranch? He asked, his voice low, controlled. Mr. Whitaker nodded. Yes, the Mercer Ridge Ranch. Another voice spoke, louder this time, unable to hide the edge of it. He gave you that? A man across the table leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a faint, humorless smile. "Oh, well, I guess everyone gets something." A few people chuckled under their breath. Caleb said nothing, but inside something tightened. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet awareness that whatever had just been handed to him wasn't a gift in the way the others understood. Bruno shifted again. This time, he didn't just sit. He stood. His body stiffened slightly, his gaze fixed on something no one else seemed to notice. His low breath was steady, controlled, but there was tension in it now. A warning, soft but unmistakable. Caleb glanced down at him. "Easy," he murmured. Bruno didn't take his eyes off the room. The lawyer continued reading, but most of the attention had already drifted. The moment had passed for everyone else. They had moved on, mentally dividing what mattered and what didn't. To them, while Mercer Ridge didn't matter, it was a place people avoided, a place stories had gathered around like fog, stories about disappearances, about strange lights in the hills, about a land that never quite gave anything back. Caleb remembered just enough of it to know those stories hadn't come from nowhere. He also remembered leaving the mountains, leaving everything behind, and never looking back. Until now. The reading concluded not long after. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people stood. Conversations resumed, this time more open, less careful. A woman passed behind Caleb and leaned toward someone else. "He can have it," she whispered. "That place ruins people." Another voice answered, "If it hasn't already." Caleb rose slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. He gave a brief nod to Mr. Whitaker. Thank you." The lawyer returned the nod, his expression unreadable. Bruno stepped close to Caleb's side again, his presence steady, grounding. Together, they walked toward the door. No one stopped them. No one tried to congratulate him. No one asked what he planned to do with the property. As Caleb stepped outside, the afternoon light hit his eyes harder than expected. He paused at the top of the courthouse steps, drawing in a slow breath. The air was cooler than he remembered. Cleaner, maybe. Or maybe it just felt that way after being inside. Bruno moved ahead of him slightly, then stopped, turning his head back as if checking. Caleb exhaled. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I heard it too." The wind carried a faint scent of pine from somewhere beyond the town, drifting down from the mountains in the distance, or from Mercer Ridge. He looked up. He could almost see it in his mind, the long dirt road, the broken fences, the wide stretch of land that seemed to swallow sound. A place people stayed away from. A place that had just been handed to him like an afterthought. Or maybe not an afterthought at all. Bruno let out a low breath, his body still tense. Caleb noticed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb reached down, resting a hand briefly against the dog's neck. "You think there's something there?" he asked, half under his breath. Bruno didn't respond. He just kept looking. Up toward the mountains. Caleb followed his gaze. Something settled in his chest then. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. A quiet, persistent unease that didn't belong to the room they had just left. This was different. Well, this felt unfinished. He hadn't expected anything from the will. But now, standing there with the wind brushing past him and the weight of that name, Mercer Ridge, echoing quietly in his mind, he understood one thing. Whatever he had just inherited, no one else wanted it for a reason. And for the first time since his name had been called, Caleb Mercer felt something shift beneath his calm. Not doubt, not regret. Something deeper. Like the sense you get just before stepping into something you don't fully understand, but know you can't walk away from. Bruno moved first. One step forward, then another, as if the decision had already been made. Caleb watched him for a second longer, then followed, without another word. And without looking back, Caleb Mercer drove out of town with both hands steady on the wheel, up the courthouse shrinking behind him in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need the noise. Silence had long since become something he understood better than most people. Bruno sat in the passenger seat, alert but calm, his posture upright as if he were on duty. Every so often, his ears twitched toward a sound Caleb couldn't hear. His eyes moved, scanning the road, the trees, the edges of the world beyond the windshield. The town faded quickly. The paved road narrowed, then gave way to cracked asphalt, and eventually to a long stretch of gravel that climbed slowly into the mountains. Pine trees grew thicker on both sides, their tall, dark trunks standing like silent watchers. The air shifted as they drove higher, cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. As Caleb adjusted his grip on the wheel, he hadn't driven this road in years, not since before everything changed. A gust of wind rattled through the trees, sharp and sudden. For a brief second, it sounded like something else. Rotors. Heavy, beating against the air. Caleb's hands tightened instinctively. His shoulders stiffened. His breath shortened. The memory hit without warning. Dust rising. Voices shouting over static. The ground shaking beneath his boots. He blinked hard, forcing his eyes back to the road in front of him. The trees steadied. The sound faded. It was only wind. Only wind. Bruno shifted beside him. Not restless, not afraid. Present. The dog leaned slightly closer, his shoulder brushing against Caleb's arm just enough to anchor him. Caleb exhaled slowly, the tension easing by degrees. I'm good," he muttered. Bruno didn't move away. The road curved sharply around the side of the mountain, climbing higher. Below, the valley stretched out in patches of green and brown, broken by fences and old structures that had seen better years. Farther in the distance, the town looked smaller now, quieter, like something left behind on purpose. Caleb passed a rusted sign half buried in weeds. No lettering left, just the remains of something that once tried to mark this place as belonging to someone. No one maintained it anymore. No one needed to. People knew. They didn't come up here. The gravel road narrowed further as it climbed, trees pressing closer on both sides until the sky above became a thin strip of pale blue. The sunlight filtered through in scattered beams, shifting as the branches swayed. Caleb slowed slightly, not because of the road, because something in him recognized the feeling settling in his chest. That same quiet tension, the kind that didn't come from fear, but from memory. "You remember this place?" he asked, glancing briefly at Bruno. The dog's gaze remained forward, focused, as if he already knew where they were going. Caleb let out a faint breath through his nose. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't think so." They drove on. Time stretched. The rhythm of the tires against gravel became steady, almost hypnotic. For a while there was nothing but the road, the trees, and the quiet hum of the engine pushing them forward. Then the landscape began to open. The trees thinned just enough to reveal a wide stretch of land ahead, rolling hills, patches of dry grass, and beyond that, in a line of broken fencing that ran along the edge of what had once been a working ranch. Mercer Ridge. Caleb recognized it before he even saw the house. Something about the way the land sat. Too still, too quiet. He slowed the truck as the road leveled out, turning onto a narrow path that cut through the overgrown grass. The tires crunched over loose stones and old wood fragments that had long since splintered under the weight of time. The ranch came into view gradually. First the fence, leaning, half-collapsed in places. Then the barn. Dark wood, weathered gray, its doors hanging unevenly, as if they had been opened and never properly closed again. And finally, the house. A low, wide structure made of aged timber and stone, standing alone against the backdrop of the mountains. Its windows were dark, reflecting nothing. The front porch sagged slightly, but the building itself remained intact. Too intact. Caleb brought the truck to a slow stop. The engine idled. For a moment, neither he nor Bruno moved. The air felt different here. Heavier, not colder. Just still. As if the wind had chosen not to follow them up this far. Bruno was the first to react. His ears lifted higher. His body tensed, not aggressively, but with awareness. He leaned forward slightly, staring past the house towards something Caleb couldn't see from where he sat. Caleb followed his line of sight. There was nothing obvious. Just the barn, the fields, the quiet stretch of land that hadn't changed nearly as much as it should have. Caleb reached for the ignition and turned the engine off. Silence settled immediately. No distant traffic, no voices, when just the faint creak of wood somewhere in the distance and the soft movement of dry grass brushing against itself. He opened the truck door and stepped out. The ground beneath his boots felt solid, familiar. And yet, not welcoming. Bruno jumped down beside him, landing lightly despite his size. He didn't wander, didn't sniff around aimlessly like most dogs would in a new place. He stayed close. But his eyes, they were fixed, not on the house, not on Caleb, on something beyond, toward the far edge of the property where the barn stood in shadow. Caleb noticed. "You see something?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't bark, didn't growl, but a low sound rumbled faintly in his chest. Not fear, warning. Caleb turned his gaze back to the house. From a distance it looked abandoned, but standing here now, closer, he could see details that didn't match that idea. The windows weren't broken. The door sat straight in its frame. Even the steps, worn as they were, hadn't completely given in. This wasn't a place that had been left to rot. It was a place that had been left alone. On purpose. Caleb took a slow step forward. Bruno didn't follow immediately. Instead, the dog shifted his stance, glancing once more toward the barn before finally moving to Caleb's side. But the tension in him didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Caleb felt it too now. That quiet pull, like something just out of sight. Not calling, but waiting. He stopped at the edge of the yard, looking out over the land that now belonged to him. The wind picked up again, just enough to stir the grass. For a brief second, the sound twisted, shifted, and once more, it wasn't wind. It was something older, something buried deep in memory. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. When he opened them again, the ranch was still there, unchanged, silent, and watching. Bruno stepped forward this time. Not toward the house, toward the barn. One step, then another. Caleb didn't call him back, didn't stop him, because for reasons he couldn't yet explain. He trusted that instinct, more than his own. And as the two of them began to move deeper into Mercer Ridge, one thing became quietly, unmistakably clear. This place wasn't empty. It never had been. Caleb stood still for a moment, letting that realization settle into him like something heavy and slow. The silence around Mercer Ridge wasn't the kind that came from abandonment. It was the kind that felt held, contained. Bruno had already moved ahead. Not far. Just enough to lead. His body stayed low but steady, each step measured, deliberate. He didn't wander off like a curious dog exploring new ground. He moved with purpose, his eyes locked toward the barn, his ears forward, catching something Caleb still couldn't hear. Caleb followed. The dry grass brushed against his jeans as he walked, the brittle stems snapping softly under his boots. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and something faint beneath it, something that didn't belong to decay. Something clean. He glanced toward the house again as he passed it. From this angle, it looked even more intact than before. The wood was weathered, yes, but not rotted. The windows were clouded with age, but not shattered. The front door sat closed, aligned perfectly in its frame. Too perfect. Yet Caleb slowed slightly, studying it. A place left alone for years shouldn't look like this. It should sag, break, give in. But this house hadn't. It had endured. Behind him, a gust of wind swept across the land, rattling the loose boards of the porch. The sound echoed briefly, then faded just as quickly. Caleb turned back toward Bruno. The dog had stopped. He stood near the edge of the barn's shadow, his posture stiff, his head slightly lowered, eyes fixed on the dark opening ahead. The barn doors hung unevenly, one tilted inward, the other barely attached at the hinge. The interior beyond was swallowed in shadow, the light from outside only reaching a few feet inside before disappearing completely. Bruno didn't go in. He didn't move at all. A low, steady rumble built in his chest. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. Caleb approached slowly, his boots crunching against gravel and old wood fragments scattered near the entrance. "You picking something up?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Caleb stopped just short of the threshold. The temperature shifted slightly as he stood there. The air cooler inside the barn, heavier. It carried a different scent, faint but present. Not rot, not animals, something else. He stepped forward. The wooden floor inside creaked under his weight, the sound echoing softly through the empty space. Dust hung in the air, visible in thin beams of light cutting through the gaps in the walls. The barn was larger than it looked from the outside. Empty stalls lined the sides, their gates hanging open. Old tools leaned against the far wall, untouched but not rusted through. A broken ladder lay on its side, half covered in dust. But again, not ruined, preserved. Caleb's eyes moved slowly across the space. Every instinct in him told him something was off. Not dangerous. Not yet. But wrong. Bruno stepped in behind him, just enough to stay close, but he didn't relax. His gaze shifted across the barn, scanning, searching. Then, he froze. His head turned sharply toward the back wall. Caleb followed his line of sight. At first, he saw nothing. Just the wooden planks, darkened with age, uneven from years of exposure. But then, a difference, subtle. A section of the wall where the dust didn't sit the same way. Cleaner. Disturbed. Caleb moved closer. Each step slow, measured. He reached out, brushing his hand lightly against the wood. The surface was cool, so solid, but the grain felt different. He pressed gently. Nothing. Then harder. A faint shift. Not enough to open, but enough to confirm what he already suspected. "This wasn't built like the rest," he murmured. Bruno let out a short, sharp breath. Caleb stepped back, scanning the ground. There, near the base of the wall, partially hidden beneath loose dirt and straw. A metal edge, barely visible. He crouched down, brushing away the debris with his hand. The dirt came away easily, revealing a flat surface beneath. Steel. Cold. Solid. Caleb's jaw tightened. He cleared more of it, exposing a rectangular outline embedded into the floor. A hatch. Bruno stepped closer now, his breathing steady but focused, his nose hovering just above the metal. Then he pawed at it once, firm, certain. Caleb sat back on his heels, staring at it. The world around him seemed to narrow, the sounds fading until there was nothing but the faint rhythm of his own breathing and the quiet presence of the dog beside him. A hatch. Buried beneath a barn, no one came near. On land no one wanted. He swallowed slowly. "Of course, Jean," he muttered under his breath. His eyes flicked briefly toward the house in the distance, then back to the hatch. This wasn't random. None of it was. Bruno lowered himself slightly, his body still tense, his gaze never leaving the metal beneath them. Waiting. Caleb placed his hand on the edge of the hatch. The steel was colder than it should have been. For a moment, he didn't move. Something deep in his chest stirred again. That same feeling from the road, from the courthouse, from the moment his name had been called. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. Like standing at the edge of something that had been there long before him. Something that had been waiting. He exhaled slowly, then tightened his grip and pulled. The hatch didn't open easily. It resisted at first, as if it had been sealed not just by time but by intention. Caleb adjusted his stance, bracing one foot against the floor, pulling harder. With a sharp metallic groan it gave. The sound echoed through the barn, loud and hollow, cutting through the silence like something breaking. Bruno stepped back slightly, his ears flicking, his body shifting into a protective stance. The hatch lifted just enough for Caleb to see the darkness beneath. A narrow opening, a drop into something unseen. Cold air rose from below, brushing against his face, different from the air above, still, but contained. Caleb held it there for a moment, staring into the black space beneath the barn floor. His heartbeat slowed, not faster, slower, focused. He had felt this before, that moment before stepping into a place you couldn't fully see, before committing to something you couldn't take back. Bruno moved closer again, pressing lightly against Caleb's side, not pushing him forward, not pulling him back, just there, steady. Caleb glanced at him. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't look away from the opening. He didn't hesitate. Caleb nodded once, then slowly. He lifted the hatch the rest of the way, and the darkness below opened up completely. Waiting. Caleb held the hatch open with one hand, staring down into the narrow void beneath the barn. The air rising from below carried a faint, almost dry chill. Not damp like a cellar, not stale like something forgotten. It was still, preserved. Bruno stepped closer to the edge, his body tense but controlled. He didn't bark. He didn't retreat. His ears remained forward, locked on the darkness as if he could see through it. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flashlight. He clicked it on, the beam cutting cleanly through the shadows below. Wooden steps. Narrow. Worn, but intact. They disappeared into the darkness after only a few feet, swallowed by blackness that refused to reflect the light any further. Caleb let out a slow breath. "Of course," he murmured. His voice sounded different down here already, flatter, quieter, as if the space itself absorbed it. He hesitated. Not because of what might be down there, but because of what stepping down would mean. A commitment. No turning back. Bruno shifted again, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding him. Caleb glanced down at the dog, then back into the hatch. "Stay close," he said. Then he lowered himself onto the first step. The wood creaked softly under his weight, but it held. He moved slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the opening, the other holding the flashlight steady as he descended. Bruno followed immediately behind him, careful, deliberate. Each movement controlled. The light revealed more of the staircase as Caleb went deeper, walls lined with reinforced timber, not crude or hastily built, but deliberate, strong. Whoever made this hadn't meant for it to collapse. At the bottom, Caleb stepped onto solid ground. Concrete. Smooth. Unexpected. He turned, shining the light around the space. It wasn't a tunnel. It wasn't a crude bunker. It was a room. A small one, but built with purpose. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes, stacked, labeled, sealed. A metal desk sat against one side, its surface cleared except for a single object resting in the center. An envelope. Caleb froze. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. The flashlight beam settled on it, illuminating the clean, unmarked surface of the paper. No dust, no signs of age, as if it had been placed there recently. As if it had been waiting. Bruno stepped forward slowly, his nose lifting, catching the scent. He circled once, then stopped just short of the desk, his posture alert but not aggressive. Caleb approached. Each step felt heavier than the last. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk before finally touching the envelope. His name was written on the front. Caleb Mercer. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, precise, familiar. His jaw tightened slightly. "That's not possible," he said under his breath. His uncle had been gone for weeks. The will had already been read. No one should have been here. No one could have been here. And yet, the envelope sat untouched, waiting for him. Bruno let out a low breath behind him. Not warning, not fear. Recognition. Caleb swallowed, then slowly picked up the envelope. It felt light. Too light for something that carried this much weight. He turned it over. The seal was intact. Unbroken. He hesitated only for a second before sliding his finger beneath the flap and tearing it open. The sound echoed faintly in the enclosed space. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, and Caleb pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting matched the name on the front. Clear, deliberate. He read, "If you're standing here, then you did what I hoped you would." Caleb's eyes moved across the page, his breath slowing as the words pulled him in. "I couldn't explain this in a will. Too many eyes, too many questions. Some things don't survive being spoken out loud." He glanced briefly around the room, the shelves, the boxes, then back to the letter. "You'll hear stories about this place, you already have. Most of them were meant to keep people away. Let them believe it. Fear is easier to maintain than truth." Caleb's grip tightened slightly on the paper. Bruno shifted closer, pressing lightly against his side. "Don't trust the stories. Don't trust what they say happened here." The next line stopped him. "Trust the dog." Caleb blinked once, then again. His eyes moved slowly over the words, as if reading them again would change what they said. "He'll find what I couldn't leave in words." The silence in the room deepened. Caleb lowered the letter slightly, his mind trying to catch up with what he had just read. Trust the dog. He glanced down at Bruno. The German shepherd stood steady, looking up at him, then back toward the shelves lining the walls. Not random, not curious, focused, as if he already understood something Caleb didn't. Caleb let out a slow breath. "You've got something to do with this," he said quietly. Bruno didn't respond. He turned instead, stepping away from the desk, his nose lowering toward the floor. He moved slowly across the room, pausing briefly near one stack of boxes, then another. Searching. Caleb watched him, the letter still in his hand. Nothing about this made sense. And yet, it did. In a way that settled somewhere deeper than logic. His uncle hadn't been careless. He hadn't been confused. Everything he did had a reason, including this. Caleb folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket. Then he followed Bruno. The dog stopped near the far wall, where a row of metal containers sat neatly arranged. Bruno's nose hovered just above one of them, then shifted slightly to the left. He pawed at the floor. Once, then again. The sound echoed softly. Caleb crouched beside him, brushing his hand along the surface. The concrete felt solid, but not seamless. There, a faint line, barely visible. Another hidden section. Caleb leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Of course," he muttered again. He glanced down at Bruno, who met his gaze briefly before returning his attention to the floor. "You're not guessing, are you?" Caleb said quietly. Bruno's ears flicked once. That was all. Caleb nodded slowly, then placed his hand flat against the concrete and pressed. Nothing happened. He shifted his weight, pressing harder. Still nothing. But the line remained. A boundary. A clue. Caleb sat back, his mind turning. His uncle had written the letter, had left it here, had expected him to find it, and had trusted the dog to lead him further, which meant this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Caleb looked around the room again. The shelves, the boxes, the order of it all. This place wasn't built to hide something from everyone. It was built to be found by the right person at the right time. Bruno let out a quiet breath, waiting. Caleb nodded once more. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see where this goes." And for the first time since stepping onto Mercer Ridge, the unease in his chest shifted. Not gone, but sharper, clearer, like a direction had finally been given. And whatever waited beneath that floor, it wasn't finished with him yet. Caleb stayed crouched for a long moment, his hand still resting against the faint outline in the concrete. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. Bruno didn't move. His nose hovered just above the seam, his breathing slow and steady. He wasn't confused. He wasn't uncertain. He knew. Caleb could see it in the way the dog held himself, not tense, not panicked, but focused, like this wasn't a discovery, as it was a destination. Caleb exhaled quietly and leaned back onto his heels. "All right," he murmured. "You brought me here, so show me." Bruno shifted slightly, then stepped to the side, circling once before stopping again at the same spot. This time he pawed at the concrete harder. Once. Twice. The sound echoed through the room, sharper now. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He ran his fingers along the seam again, slower this time, searching for something he might have missed. The line wasn't just a crack. It was intentional. Clean. Straight. Engineered. He pressed again, adjusting his weight, then pushed harder near one corner. Nothing. He moved to the opposite side. Still nothing. Bruno let out a soft huff of breath, then lowered his body, pressing his weight down as if trying to force something to give. Caleb watched him. Then something clicked. He shifted his position and pressed down exactly where Bruno had been leaning. There. A faint sound. A mechanical shift, subtle but real. Caleb froze, then pressed again, firmer this time. A low metallic click answered. The section of concrete didn't lift, but it loosened. Just enough. Caleb's pulse slowed, his focus sharpening. "Good," he said quietly, more to Bruno than himself. He stood, moving quickly now but without panic. His eyes scanned the room again until they landed on a metal pry bar leaning against the far wall, something he hadn't paid attention to before. Of course it was there. Everything here had a purpose. He grabbed it and returned to the seam, sliding the edge carefully into the gap that had opened. "Let's see what you're hiding," he muttered. He applied pressure. At first, nothing. Then, a deep, heavy shift. The concrete panel lifted slightly, the sound grinding low and slow, as if it hadn't been moved in years. Dust fell away from the edges. Bruno stepped back, his ears flicking, but his eyes never left the opening. Caleb pushed harder. The panel gave, rising just enough for him to get his fingers underneath and pull it aside. It was heavier than expected, solid, deliberate, not something meant to be opened casually. When it finally shifted clear, a second opening revealed itself beneath. Darker, deeper, colder. Caleb leaned forward, shining the flashlight down. Another set of steps, narrower this time, steeper, and disappearing far beyond the reach of the light. The air that rose from below was different. Not stale, not rotten, but old, sealed. Like something that had been waiting a long time to be disturbed. Caleb's chest tightened slightly. Not from fear, from memory. Tight corridors. Low ceilings. Darkness pressing in from all sides. His fingers tightened instinctively around the flashlight. For a brief moment, the world shifted again. Dust became sand. The cool air turned dry and suffocating. The silence filled with distant echoes. Boots on stone. Voices calling out. The sharp crack of something he didn't want to remember. Caleb blinked hard. The vision snapped. The room returned. The concrete. The shelves. Bruno. Bruno was already beside him again. Closer this time. The dog pressed firmly against Caleb's leg, grounding him, steadying him. Caleb exhaled slowly, his breath uneven for a moment before settling. "I'm all right," he said, though his voice came out quieter than intended. Bruno didn't move away. Didn't need to. Caleb looked down at the opening again, then at the dog. "You really want me to go down there?" he said. Bruno's gaze lifted briefly, meeting his. Steady, certain, no hesitation. Caleb let out a short breath through his nose. Figures. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight, then stepped toward the edge. This staircase was tighter, more confined. The walls closer together. Less forgiving. Caleb lowered himself carefully, placing one foot onto the first step. The wood didn't creak this time, because it wasn't wood. It was reinforced steel, coated in something to dampen sound. Intentional. Everything here was intentional. Bruno followed immediately, staying just behind him, close enough that Caleb could feel the dog's presence with every step. Down they went. Deeper. The light stretched only a few feet ahead, the rest swallowed by darkness that seemed to press closer the further they descended. The air grew cooler, stiller. Caleb counted the steps without realizing it. 5, 10, 15. At 20, his shoulders tightened. At 25, his breathing slowed again, not out of calm, but control. At 30, the steps ended. Caleb stepped onto solid ground once more. This room was larger, much larger. The flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing rows of metal cabinets, locked cases, and long shelves lined with sealed containers. Not scattered, not chaotic, organized, precise, like an archive. Bruno moved ahead, his pace measured, his head low as he scanned the space. As Caleb followed, slower now, his eyes taking in the details. Each cabinet had labels, dates, codes. Some he didn't recognize. Some he did. His chest tightened again. Military designations, operations, locations. He stepped closer to one of the cabinets, brushing his hand lightly over the surface. Cold. Unmarked except for a single number. He opened it. Inside. Files. Dozens of them. Neatly arranged. Untouched. Caleb pulled one out at random. The paper was crisp, preserved. He flipped it open. Names, dates, reports. His eyes moved faster now, scanning, processing, then stopping. His breath caught. He stared at the page, the words blurring for a second before snapping back into focus. He knew this format, knew this structure. These weren't just records. They were reports, official, detailed. That never meant to be here. Caleb swallowed slowly. Behind him, Bruno stopped moving. The dog stood still, his posture calm now. Not tense, not searching, like he had brought Caleb exactly where he needed to be. Caleb looked around the room again. At the shelves, the cabinets, the weight of it all pressing in from every side. "This isn't a ranch," he said quietly. His voice echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the space. "It never was." He looked down at the file in his hands, then back at the room. And for the first time since stepping onto Mercer Ridge, Caleb Mercer understood one thing with absolute clarity. This place hadn't been abandoned. It had been protected, hidden. And now, it had been given to him. Not as land, not as property, but as something far heavier. Something that had waited, all for someone who would recognize it and wouldn't run. Bruno stepped closer, his shoulder brushing Caleb's leg again. Steady, loyal, unwavering. Caleb nodded once, his expression tightening into something more focused now. "All right," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." And somewhere deep in the silence of that underground room, it felt like the place itself had been waiting to hear exactly that. Caleb stood still, the file still open in his hands, his eyes locked on the pages, but no longer reading them line by line. He was seeing patterns now, connections. This wasn't just one report. It was a system. He slid the file back into the cabinet and opened another, then another. Each one told a different story, different names, different locations, different outcomes. Oh, but they all shared something beneath the surface, something unspoken, something carefully contained. These weren't just records of what had happened. They were records of what had been managed. Caleb's jaw tightened. He stepped back, turning slowly, scanning the entire room again. Rows of cabinets, boxes labeled by date, everything categorized, preserved. This wasn't a dumping ground for forgotten information. This was an archive. Deliberate. Protected. Hidden in plain sight behind fear and rumor. Caleb exhaled slowly. "They weren't hiding from this place, he murmured. "They were hiding it." Bruno stood quietly beside him, no longer searching. The dog had settled into a calm watchfulness, his posture steady, his breathing even. Whatever urgency had driven him earlier had passed. He had done his part, and now it was Caleb's turn. Caleb moved toward a long metal table at the center of the room. Unlike the desk above, this one was larger, built for work. Several files were already laid out across it, as if someone had been in the middle of something before walking away. But the dust? There wasn't much of it. Not enough for a place that had been sealed this long. Caleb frowned slightly. He reached out, running a finger lightly across the surface. A faint line followed. Clean. Too clean. This place wasn't forgotten, he said quietly. It was maintained. Bruno's ears flicked once, but he didn't move. Caleb picked up one of the files from the table. This one was thicker, older. The paper slightly yellowed, but still intact. He opened it. The handwriting inside was different, more personal, less structured than the official reports in the cabinets. Notes, observations, names written in margins, connections drawn between events that, on the surface, had nothing to do with each other. Caleb's eyes narrowed as he read. A local business owner involved in a land dispute. A sheriff who had quietly stepped down years earlier. A family that had left town suddenly, without explanation. Each story had been recorded, not exposed, not reported. Contained. Caleb leaned back slightly, his mind turning faster now. His uncle hadn't been collecting secrets for power. He had been holding them, keeping them from becoming something worse, keeping them from spreading. The realization settled heavily in Caleb's chest. This wasn't about hiding the truth, he said under his breath. It was about controlling it. He closed the file slowly, setting it back on the table. Around him, the room no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like responsibility, like weight, like something passed down, not by accident, but by choice. Caleb turned, his gaze sweeping across the shelves again. Each box, each file, each name, all of it now belonged to him, not as an inheritance, as a burden. Bruno stepped closer, pressing lightly against his leg again. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head without thinking, his fingers brushing through the thick fur behind his ears. "You knew, didn't you?" he said quietly. Bruno didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. Caleb let out a slow breath. "I thought this place was broken," he continued. Thought it was something people avoided because it had nothing left." He shook his head slightly. "It's the opposite." He looked back at the room. They stayed away because it had too much. Silence followed. Heavy, but no longer unsettling. Clear. For the first time since arriving, Caleb didn't feel like an outsider here. He felt placed. Like every step he had taken, from the courthouse to the road, to the barn, to this room, had been leading him here. Not by chance, by design. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter again, unfolding it slowly. "Trust the dog." His eyes flicked briefly to Bruno. The dog stood calm now, his role fulfilled for the moment. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he said softly. "I get it now." He folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. Then he moved back to the table, as his hands steady, his posture different now, less guarded, more deliberate. He began organizing the files already laid out, aligning them, scanning their contents more carefully this time. Not as someone searching for answers, but as someone beginning to understand the questions. Time passed without him noticing. The light from his flashlight shifted as he adjusted it, casting long shadows across the walls. The room remained silent, undisturbed, as if it had accepted his presence. Then, a sound. Faint. Distant. Caleb froze. Bruno's head lifted instantly, ears snapping forward. Both of them turned toward the staircase. The sound came again. Soft. Almost too quiet to be certain. A shift. A creak. Not from below, from above. Caleb's grip tightened slightly on the edge of the table. His mind moved quickly, at instinct sharpening. He hadn't closed the hatch, hadn't sealed the barn. Anyone could walk in. Bruno let out a low, controlled growl. Not loud, but focused. Warning. Caleb reached for the flashlight, angling it toward the base of the stairs, the beam cutting upward into the darkness above. Nothing moved. Nothing visible. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Caleb stood slowly, every movement measured. "We're not alone," he said quietly. Bruno stepped forward, positioning himself between Caleb and the stairs without being told. Protective. Ready. Caleb's eyes narrowed. The calm he had just found didn't disappear. It shifted, hardened, because whatever this place had been before, hidden, feared, protected, it wasn't untouchable anymore, and someone else had just stepped into it. Caleb didn't move right away. He stood there in the dim underground room, the beam of his flashlight fixed on the staircase, his breathing slow and controlled. Years of training took over before his thoughts could catch up. Assess. Listen. Don't rush. Bruno stood in front of him, body angled toward the stairs, his low growl steady now. Not loud, not panicked. Just enough to say something was wrong. Caleb tilted his head slightly, focusing. There it was again, a faint shift above. Wood, weight, careful movement. Whoever was up there wasn't stomping around. They weren't careless. They were trying not to be heard. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Stay," he whispered. Bruno didn't move. Caleb reached down and picked up a metal flashlight from the table, switching it off to reduce the light. While the darkness pressed in tighter immediately, the single beam now narrower, more controlled. He stepped toward the stairs, each movement measured, each breath quiet. The air felt heavier with every step upward, the space narrowing again as he climbed. His hand brushed lightly against the wall for balance, but his focus stayed fixed above. Halfway up, a sound. Closer now. A footstep. Then silence. Caleb froze. His heart didn't race. It slowed, focused, the same way it used to before something went wrong. He climbed the rest of the stairs without making a sound, stopping just short of the opening. The hatch above was still open, a thin slice of gray light cutting across the darkness. Bruno remained below, unmoving, waiting. Caleb listened. Nothing. No footsteps now. No movement. But the silence felt different, more disturbed. He moved up slowly, his head rising just enough to see over the edge. The barn looked the same, empty, still. The broken doors hung where they had before, the light outside unchanged. But something wasn't right. The air had shifted. Caleb pulled himself up fully, stepping onto the barn floor without a sound. He kept low, scanning the space. Nothing. No one. But the dust near the entrance. It had been disturbed. Fresh marks. Not his. Caleb crouched, brushing his fingers lightly across the ground. The pattern was faint, but clear enough. Boots. Recent. He stood slowly, turning his head toward the open barn doors. The land beyond stretched out quiet and still, the dry grass swaying gently in the breeze. No movement, no figures. If someone had been here, they were gone now, or watching from somewhere he couldn't see. Bruno came up behind him, silent as a shadow. The dog moved to his side, his body still tense, his eyes scanning the open land. Caleb straightened slightly. "They knew," he said quietly. Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb looked back toward the hatch. Open, exposed. Then back to the land. Someone had come here. Not by accident. Not by chance. They had known exactly where to look. Caleb's chest tightened slightly, not with fear, but with something heavier. Responsibility. He turned and walked back toward the hatch, his movements quicker now but still controlled. Bruno followed closely. They descended again into the underground room, Caleb pulling the hatch closed behind them this time with a firm, final motion. The metal sealed with a dull, heavy sound that echoed through the space. Oh, better. Contained. Caleb stood still for a moment, listening again. Nothing followed them down. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Now it held tension, awareness. Caleb moved back toward the table, his mind turning faster now. "They're not looking for the land," he said quietly. "They're looking for this." Bruno stayed close. Caleb reached for one of the files again, flipping it open. But this time the words didn't come easily. They blurred, shifted. The room around him seemed to tighten. The air, too still, too close. His breath caught, not from fear, from something deeper, a memory rising fast and without warning. The walls, closing in, the light, too narrow, the sound of his own breathing, too loud. Caleb's hand tightened around the edge of the table. His vision flickered. Oh, for a second. The underground room wasn't a room anymore. It was a tunnel, dust in the air, voices shouting, the sharp echo of something he couldn't escape. "Move! Move!" The memory hit hard, too real, too close. Caleb staggered back slightly, his breath shortening, his chest tightening as if the air had been pulled away from him. Bruno reacted instantly. The dog stepped in front of him, pressing firmly against Caleb's legs, grounding him, blocking his movement just enough to keep him from backing further into the wall. Caleb shook his head once, trying to push the image away. But it clung. The darkness, the noise, the weight of it. Bruno let out a low, steady sound. Not a growl this time, but something deeper. Calming, present, real. Caleb's hand dropped from the table, resting against the dog's back. Solid, warm. Here. He focused on that. Not the tunnel. Not the memory. Bruno. The steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. The feel of fur under his hand. The quiet, grounding presence that didn't ask anything from him. Just stayed. Caleb inhaled slowly. Then again. The room shifted back. The walls returned. The table. The files. The reality in front of him. His breathing steadied. The tightness in his chest eased. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I'm here," he said quietly. Bruno stayed pressed against him for another moment before easing back, but he didn't move far. He wouldn't. Caleb ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "The war doesn't end, does it?" he murmured. No answer came, but he already knew. He looked around the room again, his gaze sharper now, clearer. This place, these records, they weren't just about other people. They were about him, about people like him, the things that followed them home, the things that never fully left. Caleb straightened, his posture steady again. "They trusted me with this," he said quietly. Not as a question, as a realization. Bruno stood beside him, calm now, his earlier tension gone. Caleb nodded once, then moved back to the table. This time, when he picked up a file, his hands didn't shake. His breath stayed steady, and his eyes, they saw clearly. Because whatever this place was, whatever it had been built to hold, it wasn't just waiting for someone to find it. It had been waiting for someone who could understand it. And Caleb Mercer finally did. He didn't rush anymore. As the urgency that had driven him moments ago had settled into something steadier now, something heavier. Caleb moved through the underground room with quiet intention, his steps measured, his eyes sharper. Bruno followed closely, no longer searching, no longer alert in the same way as before. The dog had shifted too. The tension had faded from his body, replaced by a calm that felt resolved. They had found what they were meant to find. Now came the part Caleb hadn't expected, understanding it. He returned to the long metal table, the file still open where he had left it. For a moment he simply stood there, looking down at it without touching it. Then slowly, he sat. The chair scraped softly against the concrete floor, the sound echoing faintly through the room. Caleb leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, and began reading again. This time, he didn't skim. He read every word, every line, every detail. The reports were precise, clinical, written in the language of operations and outcomes. But beneath that language, Caleb could see what others might miss. The human cost. The decisions made in moments where there were no good options. The kind of choices that followed you long after the mission ended. His jaw tightened slightly as he turned the page. Another file. Another operation. Different location. Different team. Same pattern. Containment. Redirection. Silence. Caleb's fingers paused at the edge of the next page. Something felt different. Subtle. But there. He flipped it open. The room seemed to narrow. The words on the page blurred for just a second, then snapped into focus. A name. His breath stopped. Oh, Caleb Mercer. He stared at it. Didn't blink. Didn't move. The letters didn't change. Didn't shift. They stayed exactly where they were, printed in the same clean, official format as everything else in this place. His name, in a file that should not exist. Bruno moved closer, his head lifting slightly as he watched Caleb. But the dog didn't interrupt, didn't nudge. He simply stayed. Caleb swallowed slowly, his throat dry, then forced himself to read. The report was dated years back. A mission. A location he knew too well. The memory hit before the words could fully settle. A dry valley. Stone structures. A situation that had gone sideways faster than anyone could control. He remembered the heat, the confusion, the moment everything broke. His grip tightened on the edge of the paper. The report didn't describe it the way he remembered. It was cleaner, contained. Certain details were adjusted, removed, reframed. Caleb's breathing slowed again, not from calm, but from something deeper. Realization. This isn't what happened, he murmured. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't that the report was false. It was that it had been shaped, refined, protected. He turned the page, attached documents, notes, handwritten, different from the official text, personal, his uncle's handwriting. Caleb leaned closer, his eyes scanning the lines. Decision made to suppress escalation. Subject not at fault under operational pressure. External factors omitted for preservation of involved personnel. Caleb's chest tightened. The room seemed to press in again, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't panic. This was weight, truth settling into place. He read the final line. Responsibility redirected. Record adjusted accordingly. Caleb sat back slowly in the chair. The paper remained in his hands, but his grip loosened slightly. He didn't need to read further. He understood. The mission that had followed him home. The one that had lived in the back of his mind for years. The one he never spoke about, never explained, never justified. It hadn't been recorded the way he thought. It had been changed, protected. Not erased. Contained. Caleb let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting across the room, all these files, all these names. They weren't just records of events. They were shields. His uncle hadn't been hiding truth out of fear, yet he had been holding it back from becoming something destructive, from turning into something that would break people. Caleb's eyes dropped back to the page in his hands. His name still stared back at him, not as a failure, not as a mistake, but as someone who had been chosen to be protected. He shook his head slightly, a quiet disbelief settling in. "All this time," he said under his breath. Bruno stepped forward, resting his head lightly against Caleb's knee. The contact was gentle, grounding. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's neck, his fingers tightening slightly in the fur. "I thought I carried that alone," he continued. His voice was quiet, steady. "But I didn't." He looked back down at the file. The anger he expected to feel didn't come. Neither did relief. What came instead was something more complicated, understanding, and something close to forgiveness. Not from others, from himself. Caleb closed the file slowly, his movements deliberate. Then he set it aside, carefully. Not like something he wanted to forget, but like something he finally understood. He stood. The room felt different now, not heavier, clearer. Every file around him held weight, but it was a weight with purpose. Not something meant to crush, something meant to be carried. Caleb walked slowly between the shelves, his eyes moving across the labels. Names he didn't know, stories he hadn't read yet. All of them waiting, all of them entrusted. He stopped near one of the cabinets, resting his hand lightly against it. "This is why," he said quietly. Not a question, a realization. His uncle hadn't left him land. He hadn't left him money, but he had left him responsibility. Because Caleb understood something others didn't. What it meant to live with decisions that never fully left you. What it meant to carry truth without letting it destroy everything around it. Bruno moved beside him again, his presence steady, constant. Caleb looked down at him. "You knew I'd need to see it," he said. The dog's eyes met his briefly, then shifted back toward the room. Still watching. Still aware. Caleb nodded once, then turned back toward the table. But this time, his posture had changed. He wasn't searching anymore. He wasn't reacting. He was choosing. And whatever came next, whatever this place demanded of him, Caleb Mercer wasn't running from it. Not anymore. He stood in the center of the underground room, the weight of everything around him settling into something steady, something he could carry. The past no longer felt like a shadow chasing him. It felt like something placed in his hands. Bruno stayed close, calm now, his earlier tension gone. But his eyes, they still watched. Caleb noticed. The dog hadn't relaxed completely, not fully, not here. Caleb glanced toward the staircase, then back to the files. "They'll come back," he said quietly. Not a guess, a certainty, because whoever had stepped into the barn earlier, they hadn't come by accident. They knew something was here. And now, so did he. Caleb moved quickly, but without panic. He began closing cabinets, returning files, restoring the order of the room exactly as he had found it. Not hiding, preserving. Bruno followed his movements, staying close but alert. But when Caleb reached the table again, he paused. His file, still sitting there, his name still inside it. He hesitated only for a second before picking it up. Then, he placed it back, carefully, exactly where it belonged, not taking it, not removing it, leaving it where it had always been. Because this place wasn't meant to be emptied. It was meant to be protected. Caleb stepped back, scanning the room one last time, then turned toward the stairs. "Let's go," he said. Bruno moved immediately. Together they climbed. The narrow steps felt tighter now, but Caleb didn't hesitate this time. His movements were steady, controlled. The darkness didn't press in the same way anymore. It didn't own him. Not anymore. He reached the top and pushed the hatch open slowly. Light spilled down into the space below. Well, the barn looked the same. Quiet. Still. But Caleb didn't trust it now. Not fully. He stepped out first, his eyes scanning the space carefully. Every shadow. Every corner. Nothing moved. But something lingered. Bruno came up beside him, his body shifting instantly into alertness again. Then, a sound. Outside. Faint. Movement in the grass. Caleb turned sharply toward the barn doors. A figure. At the edge of the property. Too far to see clearly. But there. Watching. Then. Gone. Slipping back into the line of trees as if it had never been there. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're not hiding anymore," he said quietly. Bruno let out a low growl, not loud, but focused. Caleb stepped forward, moving out of the barn and into the open air. The sky had shifted. The light softer now, to the sun dipping lower toward the mountains. Time had passed faster than he realized. The land stretched out in front of him, quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. Now it felt watched, measured. Caleb walked slowly toward the house, Bruno staying close at his side. Halfway across the yard, another sound. Closer. Behind them. A sudden shift of gravel. Caleb turned. Too late. A man stepped out from behind the barn, hands raised slightly. Not aggressive, but not casual either. Mid-50s, weathered face, eyes sharp. "You went down there," the man said. Not a question, a statement. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. The man nodded once as if that confirmed something. "Figured you would," he continued. "Sooner or later." Bruno stepped forward, placing himself between Caleb and the man, his body low. "Ready?" The man noticed, paused, then gave a faint, humorless smile. "Good dog," he said. "You'll need him." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The man hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Name's Carter." He gestured vaguely toward the land around them. "I used to work with your uncle." Caleb didn't relax, didn't lower his guard. "Used to," he repeated. Carter nodded. "Long time ago." Silence stretched between them. The wind moved through the grass, carrying a low, steady sound across the open space. Caleb watched him carefully. "You came looking for something," Caleb said. Carter's expression didn't change. "Everyone does," he replied. "That doesn't answer the question." "No," Carter agreed. "It doesn't." He took a slow step forward. Bruno growled louder this time. Carter stopped immediately. "Easy," he said, raising a hand slightly. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Caleb didn't believe that. Not fully. "What do you want?" he asked. Carter's eyes flicked briefly toward the barn, then back to Caleb. "You found the records," he said. Again, not a question. Caleb said nothing. Carter exhaled slowly. "Then you already know what this place is." "I know enough," Caleb replied. Carter studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then you know why it matters." Caleb didn't answer, because he did, and that was the problem. Carter shifted his weight slightly, glancing toward the trees behind him. "You're not the only one who knows about it," he said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I figured." Carter looked back at him. "Some people want those records," he continued, "not to protect them." A pause. "Oh, to use them." Bruno's growl deepened. Caleb placed a hand lightly on the dog's back, not to calm him, but to steady him. "Why tell me?" Caleb asked. Carter gave a small shrug. "Because you're standing here instead of running." His gaze sharpened slightly. "That means something." Silence fell again, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Caleb studied him, trying to read him, trying to decide. "Are you one of them?" Caleb asked. Carter didn't answer right away. Then, "No," he said simply. Another pause. "But they'll come." The wind picked up again, rustling through the dry grass. The sun dipped lower. The shadows stretched longer across the land. Caleb felt it then. Not fear, not uncertainty. Something else. A line being drawn. This place, these records, they weren't just his now. They were something others would fight for, something others would take, if he let them. Bruno shifted slightly, his body pressing closer to Caleb's leg. "Ready?" Caleb nodded once, then looked back at Carter. "They won't," he said quietly. Carter held his gaze for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "We'll see." He turned then, stepping back toward the trees. But before disappearing, he paused. "One more thing," he said without turning around. Caleb didn't respond. Carter's voice carried back to him. "Your uncle didn't just protect those files." A beat. "He protected you." Caleb's breath stilled. Then Carter was gone, swallowed by the trees. The land fell silent again, but not empty. Not anymore. Caleb stood there for a long moment, Bruno at his side, the weight of Carter's words settling deep. "Protected you." Caleb exhaled slowly, then turned back toward the house. The decision had already been made. He just hadn't said it out loud yet. But he would. Soon. Because whatever was coming, he wasn't walking away. Not this time. Caleb stood in the fading light, the mountains casting long shadows across Mercer Ridge. The air had cooled, carrying a quiet stillness that felt different now. Not empty, not forgotten. Watchful. He turned toward the house, his steps steady, Bruno pacing beside him without hesitation. The dog stayed close, closer than before, his body brushing Caleb's leg every few steps as if making sure he was still there, grounding him. Caleb climbed the porch steps slowly, each one creaking beneath his weight. He paused at the front door, his hand resting on the handle. It wasn't locked. He pushed it open. Yet the interior was dim, lit only by the last stretch of daylight filtering through the windows. Dust hung lightly in the air, but the room felt maintained, like everything else here. He stepped inside, Bruno following immediately. The door closed behind them with a soft, heavy sound. For a moment, Caleb just stood there, listening. The house creaked faintly, settling as the temperature dropped with the coming night. The sound echoed through the empty rooms, not threatening, not hostile, just present. Caleb moved forward, scanning the space. Furniture remained, simple, ordered, untouched. He walked into the main room, his boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. A fireplace sat cold against one wall, its stone blackened with old use but not abandoned. Bruno moved ahead this time, his nose low, tracing the edges of the room, checking corners, doorways, windows. Still working, still protecting. Caleb watched him for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "You don't stop, do you?" he said quietly. Bruno glanced back at him briefly, then returned to his quiet patrol. Caleb stepped toward the fireplace, resting his hand lightly against the stone. Cold, solid, real. Everything here was real. Nothing imagined. Nothing exaggerated. Just hidden. He turned and walked toward the kitchen. Clean. Too clean. Not used recently, but not neglected either. He opened a cabinet. Empty. Another. Still empty, but not dusty. Caleb closed it slowly. Someone had been here. Not living here. Maintaining it. Preparing it. For him. The realization settled deeper this time. This wasn't inheritance. It was preparation. Caleb moved back into the main room just as a sound, sharp, outside. Bruno reacted instantly. His head snapped toward the door, his body lowering slightly, tension returning all at once. Then, a crack. Wood splintering. Caleb turned just as something struck the side of the house. Not loud, but deliberate. Another impact followed, this time against the back wall, testing, not breaking in, yet. Bruno barked once, sharp and controlled, then moved toward the door. Caleb stepped in front of him. "Hold," he said firmly. Bruno stopped, but didn't relax. The air in the house shifted, tightening around them. Caleb moved toward the window, keeping low as he approached. He reached the edge and glanced out carefully. Movement. At least 2 figures, maybe 3. Spread out, keeping distance, watching, waiting. His jaw tightened. "They're here," he said quietly. Bruno growled low, the sound deep and steady. Caleb stepped back from the window, his mind already moving ahead. Not panic, not fear. Strategy. He glanced toward the door, then toward the hallway leading deeper into the house, then back to Bruno. "We're not staying exposed," he said. Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb moved quickly now, but controlled, guiding the dog toward the back of the house. "Come on." They moved through a narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking softly beneath their steps. Caleb opened a side door, leading into what had once been a storage room. Smaller. No windows. Better. He stepped inside, Bruno following, then closed the door behind them quietly. The darkness pressed in for a moment before Caleb switched on a small flashlight. The room was bare, except for one thing. A metal cabinet. Locked. Caleb stepped toward it, his hand hovering briefly over the handle. Then he stopped. Outside. Footsteps. Closer now. The sound of gravel shifting under weight. Bruno's body tensed again, his stance lowering, ready. Caleb exhaled slowly. "They're testing the perimeter," he murmured. Not attacking. Not yet. Seeing what he would do. Seeing if he would run. Caleb's expression hardened. He moved back toward the door, listening. A voice carried faintly from outside. "Come on out, Mercer!" Mocking, confident. Another voice laughed. "They always run." Caleb closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Steady. He reached down, resting his hand firmly on Bruno's neck. "They don't know us," he said quietly. Bruno stayed still, ready. Caleb straightened. At the fear that might have been there earlier was gone, replaced by something stronger, clearer. Choice. He stepped back from the door, not opening it, not responding, not giving them anything. Outside, the footsteps shifted again, closer. Then, a sudden crash against the front of the house. Wood splintering louder this time, testing again, pushing further. Bruno barked sharply, then growled, his body vibrating with restrained energy. Caleb didn't move, didn't react. He simply stood there, listening, counting, measuring, because this wasn't a fight he could win by reacting. It was a fight he would win by holding, by not giving ground. The noise outside continued for a few more moments, then stopped. Silence returned, but not empty. Never empty. Caleb waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Nothing. There's no footsteps, no voices, just wind, just the faint creak of the house settling again. Bruno's growl faded slowly, though his posture remained alert. Caleb exhaled. "They're not done," he said quietly. Not fear, just fact. He looked around the small room again, then back at Bruno. The dog met his gaze, steady, unshaken. Caleb nodded once. "Neither are we." He stepped back toward the metal cabinet, his hand settling firmly on the handle this time. Because whatever came next, whatever they wanted, he wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting something bigger, something that had already been entrusted to him. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Mercer didn't feel alone carrying it, because Bruno never left his side. The night passed without another strike. No more voices. No more footsteps. But Caleb didn't sleep. He sat on the floor of the small storage room with his back against the wall, Bruno stretched out beside him, but never fully resting. Every few minutes, the dog would lift his head, ears twitching toward some distant sound, then settle again, never letting go of his awareness. Caleb understood that feeling, that state between rest and readiness. He had lived in it for years. Only now, it wasn't the past pressing in. It was the present, and it had chosen him. When the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the edges of the house, Caleb stood slowly, his body stiff but controlled. He stepped out into the hallway, Bruno immediately rising and following. The house was quiet. No signs of forced entry, no damage beyond the outer walls. They hadn't broken in. They had only tested, or measured. Caleb walked into the main room, his gaze sweeping across the space again. Nothing had changed. But everything had. Because now he knew. This place was no longer hidden. He moved to the front door and opened it slowly. The morning air was cold, sharp against his skin. The land stretched out before him, still and quiet under the early light. But near the edge of the yard, tracks, boot prints, multiple, fresh. Caleb stepped forward, crouching down to examine them. The impressions were clear enough. 3 men, maybe more, moving in a loose pattern around the house, watching, planning. Bruno stood close behind him, his nose low, following the trail with precision. "They'll be back," Caleb said quietly. "Not if, when." He stood and looked out toward the tree line where the figures had disappeared the night before. They think this is just a place," he continued. "A piece of land." Bruno let out a low breath. Caleb shook his head slightly. They're wrong. He turned and walked back toward the barn. The grass bent beneath his steps, the early frost crunching softly under his boots. The world looked calm in the daylight, but Caleb saw past that now. He saw the lines, the approach points, the places someone would hide, the places someone would come from. Bruno moved ahead this time, leading again, but not with urgency, with certainty. They reached the barn. Caleb stepped inside, moving straight to the hatch. He didn't hesitate. He opened it, descended, closed it behind him. The underground room welcomed him back with its steady, unchanging silence. Bruno followed, his posture calm again. Here. The tension above didn't reach them, not fully. Caleb walked to the center of the room and stopped, then turned slowly, looking at everything. The shelves, the files, the weight of it all. He wasn't just standing in a hidden archive. He was standing in something far more dangerous. Truth. And truth, in the wrong hands, could destroy more than it saved. Caleb stepped toward the cabinets, opening one after another, not to search this time, but to assess. To understand the scope, the reach, the names. Each file he touched added another layer. Local officials, business leaders, families, decisions made quietly, mistakes corrected silently, lives redirected before they could fall apart. His uncle hadn't built this to control people. He had built it to protect them. From exposure, from consequence, from themselves. Caleb exhaled slowly. This isn't about hiding, he said. It's about balance. Bruno stood beside him, watching. Caleb closed the cabinet and turned. That's what they don't understand. His voice was firmer now, clear. They think this is leverage. He shook his head. It's responsibility. He moved to the table, placing both hands firmly against its surface. They'd tear it apart, he continued. Use it, twist it. His eyes hardened. I won't let them. The words settled into the room, steady and final. Bruno stepped closer, his shoulder brushing Caleb's leg. Caleb looked down at him. You already knew that, he said quietly. Bruno's ears flicked once. That was enough. Caleb nodded, then turned back to the room. He moved with purpose now, opening compartments, checking locks, testing access points, the hidden panel, the secondary hatch, the reinforced walls. His uncle hadn't just hidden this place. He had fortified it, prepared it, for exactly this moment. Caleb found the secondary compartment behind the far wall, a reinforced steel section, locked with a mechanism more complex than the rest. Inside, he knew, without opening it, was where the most sensitive records were kept, the ones not meant to be accessed easily, the ones worth protecting at all costs. Caleb rested his hand against the steel, cold, unyielding. Good, he murmured. He stepped back, then reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter again. He read the final lines once more. Trust the dog. Caleb looked at Bruno. The dog stood calm, unshaken, ready. Caleb folded the letter and placed it back inside his jacket. Then he straightened. Fully, but for the first time since stepping onto Mercer Ridge, he wasn't reacting. He wasn't adjusting. He wasn't trying to understand. He had decided. This place stays, he said quietly. No one takes it. His voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. The room held it, accepted it. Bruno moved to stand directly beside him, not in front, not behind, beside, equal, steady. Caleb turned toward the stairs. They'll come back, he said. Bruno's ears lifted slightly. Caleb nodded once. Let them. He started toward the exit. Each step up felt different now, not heavier, stronger, because the man who had walked down here searching wasn't the same man walking back up. That man had been unsure, unsettled, still running from something he didn't fully understand. This one wasn't. Caleb pushed the hatch open and stepped back into the barn, the morning light cutting across his face. He didn't shield his eyes. He didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, Bruno beside him. The land stretched out ahead, still quiet, still waiting. But now, it had a guardian, and anyone who stepped onto it again wouldn't find a man trying to escape. They would find a man who had already chosen to stand and would not move. The days that followed did not come with noise. They came quietly, like everything else that mattered on Mercer Ridge. Caleb worked without rushing. He repaired what needed repairing, reinforcing the barn doors, adjusting the hinges on the house, clearing sightlines across the field. Not to make the place welcoming, but to make it visible, controlled. Bruno stayed close through it all, never far, and never distracted. If Caleb moved, Bruno moved. If Caleb stopped, Bruno watched. The bond between them had shifted into something deeper than habit. It had become purpose. At night, Caleb walked the perimeter, his steps slow and deliberate, the mountains stretching silent around him. Bruno moved ahead at times, then circled back, always checking, always aware. Nothing approached without being noticed. Nothing lingered without being understood. The men who had come before, they didn't return immediately, but their presence never fully left. Caleb saw it in small things, a broken branch where there hadn't been one, a footprint at the edge of the tree line, a distant movement that vanished the moment it was seen. They were still out there, waiting, watching. But so was he. One afternoon, a truck appeared at the base of the road, not hidden, not cautious. It drove slowly up toward the property, stopping a distance away from the house. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, Bruno beside him, both of them still. The driver stepped out. Not one of the men from before. Older, calm, hands visible. He didn't approach right away. Instead, he stood there, looking out across the land as if trying to understand it. Then he spoke. "You're staying." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man nodded once. "Figured you would." A pause, then, "They've already tried to reach you, haven't they?" Caleb's eyes didn't shift. "Who are you?" he asked. The man took a slow step forward. "Name's Halpern," he said. "I work with people who prefer things to stay quiet." Bruno shifted slightly, was his posture tightening just enough to signal caution. Halpern noticed, gave a faint nod. "Good dog," he said, then looked back at Caleb. "You've got something up here that people are going to want," he continued. "Not just the ones you've seen." Caleb stepped down from the porch, his boots steady against the ground. "I know," he said. Halpern studied him for a moment, then asked, "And what are you going to do about it?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "Protect it." Simple, clear, final. Halpern's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Approval, understanding. "Then you'd better understand something," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, holding it out but not stepping closer. Caleb didn't move to take it. "What is it?" he asked. "Proof," Halpern replied. "Of what?" "That you're not the only one who's been watching." Silence stretched between them. The wind moved softly through the grass. Bruno's eyes stayed locked on the man. Caleb stepped forward slowly and took the envelope. Opened it. Inside, A single photograph. Grainy. Distant. But clear enough. Figures near the tree line. The same ones from before. Only this time, there were more. Caleb's jaw tightened. Halpern spoke again. "They won't rush you," he said. "They'll wait. They'll test. They'll try to make you choose the easy way out." Caleb looked up. "There isn't one," he said. Halpern gave a small nod. "Good." He turned, walking back toward his truck. But before getting in, he paused. "You were chosen for a reason," he said without looking back. Then he drove off. The dust settled slowly behind him, but the land returned to silence. Caleb stood there, the photograph still in his hand. Bruno stepped closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against Caleb's leg. Caleb looked down at him. "You knew it wouldn't be simple," he said. Bruno's ears flicked. That was all. Caleb nodded, then turned back toward the house. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across Mercer Ridge. The mountains stood still in the distance, unmoved, unchanged. But the land, it felt different, alive. Not with fear, with purpose. Caleb stepped onto the porch again, Bruno following. He paused at the doorway, looking out across everything he now understood. This place had never been cursed. It had been protected. Feared, so it could remain untouched. Hidden, so it could survive. And now, it had been passed on. Not to someone who wanted it, but to someone who could carry it. Caleb stepped inside, moving through the house with quiet certainty. He reached the small table near the window and pulled out a blank notebook. He opened it, took a pen, and wrote. Not a report. Not a record. A decision. "This place is not meant to be exposed," he wrote slowly. "It is meant to be protected." He paused, then added, "Not everything true needs to be seen. Some things need to be guarded." He closed the notebook, set it down, then walked back outside. The evening air was cool now, the sky shifting into deeper shades as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Bruno sat beside him, still, watching. Caleb looked out across Mercer Ridge one last time, then spoke quietly. "Some people inherit land," he said. "Some inherit money." He rested a hand on Bruno's back. "But some," he exhaled slowly, "inherit responsibility." The wind moved through the grass. The land remained still, and somewhere beyond the trees, eyes still watched. But they would not find weakness here. They would not find fear. Because what stood on Mercer Ridge now was not a man trying to understand what he had been given. It was a man who already knew, and a dog who would never leave him. Guarding something that wasn't meant to be owned, only protected. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Mercer felt exactly where he was meant to be. If this story meant something to you, take a second and let me know. Just comment 1 if you believe some people are chosen to carry responsibility, or comment 0 if you think most people would walk away. It's simple, but I read every single one. And if you're still here, so that tells me you understand stories like this go deeper than just land or money. So hit subscribe and stay with me, because the next story might hit even closer to home.